Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. What's the story behind the fall of Panjshir? A secret sinister deal. The Taliban took over Afghanistan, but one holdout of resistance remained, the Panjshir Valley. They reportedly reached out to Pakistan and made a deal. You help us take Panjshir and we help you take Kashmir. This is the barter. Panjshir for Kashmir. Tonight on Gravitas, we'll tell you what this means, how there's history to support this, what the Taliban and Pakistan gain from each other, and how India is preparing to deal with this threat. Meanwhile, on the eastern border, another neighbor is in action. China is keeping the border threat alive with military drills. We'll get you a special report. Also on the show, the Taliban's latest diktat. They've banned protests and they're beating up journalists who cover protests. We'll show you images. The Taliban also have a new demand. The US must drop the Haqqanis from their blacklist. They cite the Doha deal. Did the US really promise to lift sanctions on the Taliban? We'll tell you what the agreement says. Terror was the top focus at the Brics summit chaired by India today. We'll bring you the highlights. And as Canada goes to polls, Justin Trudeau tumbles. We'll discuss why pundits say he won't be third time lucky. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Days after announcing its new government, the Taliban allowed 200 foreigners in Afghanistan, including Americans, to leave on charter flights from Kabul. The departures are among the first international flights to take off from Kabul airport since the Taliban swept to power. The United States records more than 40 million cases of COVID-19 as the more contagious Delta variant leads to a surge in cases across the country, with a sharp rise in hospitalizations. Children make up more than a quarter of the weekly COVID cases, say doctors. Bangladesh's Rapid Action Battalion arrests a suspected militant from the capital, Dhaka, who is allegedly one of the top leaders of the banned militant outfit, Jamaat-ul-Mujahideen, Bangladesh. Reports say that RAB seized a huge cache of arms and ammunition during the raid. Officials say that rebel forces from Ethiopia's conflicted Tigray region kill at least 120 civilians in a village in the Amhara region. The Tigrayan forces have denied any involvement in the killing of civilians. Dozens of Palestinians injured in clashes with Israeli soldiers in the occupied West Bank as Palestinians protest in solidarity with the 6 men who escaped from a high-security prison. Relatives of the prisoners have been arrested after Israel launched a massive manhunt to capture those who broke out of prison. The main suspect in an attack that killed 130 people in Paris in 2015 describes himself defiantly as an Islamic State soldier and shouted at the judge during the trial into the attacks. Salah Abdeslam is believed to be the only surviving member of the group that carried out multiple attacks in Paris in 2015. After taking a hit of $2 billion in almost 2 decades, Ford Motor will stop manufacturing in India, becoming the latest automaker to leave a major growth market dominated by Asian rivals. The automaker will continue its presence in the country through imports of global vehicles and electrified products. Fire and smoke alarms go off at the Russian segment of the International Space Station as the crew reports smoke and the smell of burnt plastic. Russia's space agency Roscosmos says that the incident took place in the Russian-built module as the station's batteries were being recharged. World number 1 Novak Djokovic is just 2 wins away from the historic calendar Grand Slam after beating Italian Matteo Berrettini in 4 sets to reach the semi-finals of the US Open. He will now take on Olympic champion Alexander Zverev. Australia are set to cancel their first ever test match against Afghanistan that was scheduled to be held in Hobart in November. Cricket Australia said the decision was taken because the newly installed Taliban government has said Afghan women will not be allowed to play sport.
I want to start today with 2 images. They sum up Afghanistan's descent into dark days. This image is of the outer wall of the US Embassy in Kabul. Look at this, it has been freshly painted. This is the flag of the Taliban. What did the wall look like earlier? Like this, 2 girls with books and a slogan. I am the future of Afghanistan. That's what it said here. Not anymore. Not under the Taliban. This is the descent to dark days that we're talking about. All the promises they made, they're showing their true colors. Busting the myth of 2.0. They've quashed women's rights. They've beaten up journalists, and now they have banned protests. If you're in Afghanistan, you will have to get permission from the Taliban before protesting against them. Same for banners and slogans. Get an approval before you use them. What happens if you defy those rules? I'll show you what happens. These pictures came out today, published in the local media. They're believed to be from Kabul. You see women protesting and the Taliban cracking down. Look at how they're dressed. In the military uniforms given by the Americans, the Taliban took posters and tore them apart. Then they began firing. The women ducked for cover. Here's what followed. Look at this man, a Talib. He attacked a woman protester with the butt of his gun. These women are the very picture of courage. They unsettle the Taliban. They risk their lives every day on streets controlled by the Taliban. Protesters have become a common sight in Afghanistan. Our correspondent Anas Malik sent us this report today.
I'm standing in front of the presidential palace. This was the last destination of today's protest, that the calls that were given. The Taliban have increased their foothold on ground, increased their presence. More and more checkposts are there. Journalists are being told that they are not allowed to cover today's activities. We've seen some arrests as well having taken place of just a handful of protesters who were just marching towards perhaps the actual destination from where the protest was to begin today.
The Taliban know they're being watched. The cameras are rolling, so they avoid shooting at people. But they don't want to appear helpless, so they fire in the air to scare people away, to remind them that defiance will lead to death. When the women try to speak out, they're whipped in full public view, and this is not even the most shocking part. What I'm about to show you is worse. These 2 men are journalists. They were detained for hours. They were punched, beaten by the Taliban with batons, electrical cables, whips. Why? Because they covered the protest. They showed the world what kind of resistance the Taliban were facing. Hence the ban on protests and the ridiculous rules. This is a dangerous mix of theocracy and autocracy. They want to wipe out everything they deem un-Islamic or inconvenient, including murals. Look at these pictures. We show you what happened at the American embassy, the wall outside the American embassy. Now, these are the streets of Kabul. Paintings promoting ideals of freedom being replaced by the symbols of the Taliban, like their flags and their Islamic slogans. They also have a message for those who have left the country, and it comes straight from the top. Their Prime Minister, Mullah Mohammad Hassan Akhund, the United Nations sanctioned terrorist, has given an interview. He says Afghan officials who left the country must return. He promises security to foreign diplomats and humanitarian relief institutions. Why should anyone believe him? He says the Taliban won't seek revenge. They won't target anyone, when in fact the Taliban are going after anyone they fancy. The Taliban have guns. They cannot fire all the time. The Taliban have rules that Afghans don't want to follow. And the Taliban have taken over a government they do not know how to run. Kabul fell almost a month ago. Afghans are starving, protesting, being killed, trying to flee. They've been abandoned by the world and their own leaders. Former Afghan President Ashraf Ghani offered an apology today. He said, and I'm quoting, "Leaving Kabul was the most difficult decision of my life," and that he did not intend to abandon his people, but it was apparently the only way, he says. Hollow words again. Coming from all sides, in fact. World powers say they'll decide on recognizing the Taliban government based on their actions. We wonder which actions they're still waiting to see. India's red lines, we know, are specific. The use of Afghan soil for anti-India terrorism. And the Taliban might cross this line. That's India's worry. Tonight we'll tell you about a sinister deal they cut with Pakistan, Panjshir for Kashmir. A terrorist barter that may have led to the fall of Panjshir. The deal is very simple. Pakistan helps the Taliban get Panjshir, and the Taliban will help Pakistan get Kashmir. At least that's the plan, we are told. Let me start from the beginning. This week we saw the capture of Panjshir. It wasn't just disappointing, it was a surprise. Panjshir is considered unconquerable. Superpowers have tried and failed. So how did a group of ragtag extremists succeed? Because they had help. Pakistani Air Force was bombing the resistance. A former Iranian president told us as much. The last time I spoke to you, you said that neighbors should not meddle and enforce the will of the Afghan people. And as I speak to you today, Panjshir has fallen to the Taliban thanks to Pakistan's invasion. Iran, we understand, has launched a probe, and WION is backing this call to probe Pakistan for Panjshir. Do you believe the world must investigate what happened in Panjshir?
The event that has unfolded in Afghanistan is quite clear. It's an international plan that will affect all the regional countries. A group has been supported by, which is created, and then it's been trained, armed, and supported by the neighbors, has captured a country and called itself a government. In the news, we heard that Pakistani officers directly got involved in the war of Panjshir. Here, I have a piece of advice for the Pakistani officials. What happened in Afghanistan will soon expand and take the grip of Pakistan and all countries that supported the Taliban.
So Pakistani military got directly involved in Panjshir. Pakistan's ISI chief was in Kabul to oversee the operation. Pakistani identity cards, according to some reports, were recovered from the men attacking Panjshir, like this one. It says Mohammad Wasim, Excise and Taxation Department, Government of Punjab. Iran has launched an investigation into foreign involvement in the Panjshir invasion. The fact is, Pakistan's involvement made all the difference. Why did they do it? You could think of two reasons. One, Pakistan doing what it does best, supporting their terrorist allies. And two, they got something in return, the promise of some covert help in Kashmir. We are told there's credible intelligence to support this. We cannot independently verify this, but we can tell you that it's a win-win for both sides. Pakistan helps the Taliban in Panjshir, and the Taliban help Pakistan in Kashmir. This was always Islamabad's plan. Install a proxy government in Kabul, pack it with hardliners and Haqqanis, and unleash terror on Kashmir. We've seen this script before. In 1996, the Taliban captured Kabul. The same year, violence surged in Kashmir. There were 4,496 terror attacks, 4,496. Around 1,400 civilians were killed. This was not a coincidence. This was the Pakistan Taliban terror machine at work. Has anything changed in 20 years? We were told yes. In May last year, there were reports that the Taliban would not interfere in Kashmir. Their spokesperson said as much. He denied all those claims. This is what he said, and I'm quoting, "The statement that has been published about India is not relevant to the Islamic Emirate. The policy of the Islamic Emirate is clear that it does not interfere in the internal affairs of other countries." That was in May 2020. The Taliban saying they will not interfere in Kashmir. The Taliban said Kashmir was India's internal affair. Cut to September 2021, the tone has changed completely. Here's what the same spokesperson, Taliban spokesperson, now says, and I'm quoting, "As Muslims, we also have a right to raise our voice for Muslims in Kashmir, India, or any other country." What changed? What happened to the so-called autonomous Taliban? They basically signed a barter. You see, Pakistan has multiple tools to interfere in Afghanistan. The most potent one is the Haqqani network. They did all the fighting. They secured Kabul. So when the loot was split, the Haqqanis got the big chunk. I'm talking about the Taliban's cabinet. The so-called Afghan nationalists and moderates have been sidelined. So here's how things stack up now. Pakistan controls the Haqqani network. The Haqqani network dominates the Taliban government. And now the change in tone makes perfect sense. Panjshir for Kashmir could be a template for the future. A series of sinister deals, all targeting India. What can Pakistan offer the Taliban is the question. For starters, political legitimacy, also much needed technical assistance. Pakistan can train the Taliban to use American equipment. It's a perfect relationship, a terror state and a terror sponsor. What does Pakistan get in return? A new staging ground. Islamabad supports multiple terror groups operating in Kashmir. The big two are the Lashkar-e-Toiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed. Their fighters joined the Taliban in the war against America. That war is now over. So where do these terrorists go? Back to targeting Kashmir. We're talking about nearly 10,000 fighters, battle-hardened, equipped with American weapons. Basically pawns for Pakistan. The Taliban can also give Islamabad spare real estate. Right now, Pakistan's terror camps are on India's radar. They're vulnerable. One option is to shift these camps to Afghanistan, a safer choice for Pakistan. The Taliban had promised to not host foreign fighters. But as the last few weeks have shown, their promises are not worth much. Some reports say foreign fighters are already pouring in through the Pak-Afghan border. How many? We don't know. But clearly the plan is in motion. Intelligence agencies have warned of possible attacks in Kashmir. The army is maintaining a high level of alertness. Unlike 1996, pushing terrorists into the Kashmir Valley will not be easy. Counterinsurgency operations have come a long way, so has intelligence. And don't forget, Kashmir is not Panjshir, and the Indian army is not the Afghan resistance. Nonetheless, this Pakistan-Taliban deal must be a wake-up call. India cannot take the Taliban at face value. Their so-called moderates are meant for PR. The real power lies with hardliners and Pakistani proxies, and they remain India's enemies. And that's just one front that India is dealing with. The other one is China. India's border with China remains a point of concern. Beijing's actions do not inspire trust, to put it mildly. Here is the latest. The PLA conducted a drill in Tibet. Chinese propaganda channels do not say when this happened, but reports say this exercise was designed to send a message to India. Fighter jets were sent up in the air to drop missiles. Chinese troops shot down drones, and ground forces used howitzers to conduct precision strikes. It looks like the Chinese military tested every war scenario. The drill involved infantry, artillery, army aviation, special forces, operation forces, electronic warfare, engineers, and chemical defense units from the PLA. The whole deal. Why did China feel the need to conduct a drill such as this on such a massive scale? Reports say there were two objectives behind the exercise. First, to test the ability of different PLA units to work together, and second, to use and test the new weapon systems deployed in the region. The emphasis was on high-altitude warfare, something that Indian forces have also been preparing for. And this is something we reported back in June. India had redirected at least 50,000 troops towards the border with China. This signaled a clear shift in India's military strategy. Indian forces now maintain an offensive military posture against China. More soldiers have been acclimatized to the harsh weather conditions of the Himalayas. Since then, both India and China have matched their deployments toe to toe. It's been more than a year now. China has shown no intention to end the standoff in Ladakh. It hasn't disengaged from the border. It hasn't kept its promises to de-escalate. And now with these drills, China is signaling that the chapter is far from over. Slight problem though. All is not well within the PLA. They've appointed yet another general to mind the border with India. General Wong Haijiang is the new commander of the PLA's Western Theatre. Do you know how many generals have held this position in the last 9 months? 3. China is changing the military commander for the Indian border every 3 months. What explains this? We don't know, but here's what we do. Changing a commander 3 times in 9 months has led to speculation. Reports say Chinese establishment was not happy with the performance of these generals, so they were shunted out. And we know when it comes to China, the establishment is basically one man. Xi Jinping, the president of everything. He leads the country, the Communist Party and the Central Military Commission. That's the top decision-making body for military affairs in China. The Chinese president recently conducted a much-publicized tour of Tibet. Evidently, he was not happy with what he saw at the border, so he booted out the generals. Let me end with this. China uses its army to threaten India, to challenge India's territorial integrity and sovereignty. It has been conducting drills to keep the threat alive. But without a reliable commander, Beijing is struggling to keep up this charade. Back in Afghanistan, the Taliban's new cabinet has a visibility problem, as in they cannot be seen in public, not because they're shy or modest, but because most of them are terror suspects. It's not an ideal situation. The Taliban are the new rulers of Afghanistan, and they want to be treated like rulers. So what are they asking for? To be removed from the United States terror blacklist. Let me show you the official statement. This is what it says. Pentagon officials have remarked that some cabinet members of the Islamic Emirate or family members of late Jalaluddin Haqqani are on the US blacklist and still targets. The Islamic Emirate considers this position a clear violation of the Doha Agreement, which is neither in the interest of the United States nor Afghanistan. Some basic facts first. The US has designated the Haqqani network as a foreign terror group. So have Canada and Britain. Haqqani leaders cannot fly abroad. They cannot buy weapons. Their assets are frozen. Despite this, they are top dogs in the Taliban cabinet. We counted at least 4 Haqqani ministers. The problem is, these are wanted men. If they set foot in the US, they could be arrested. So the Taliban want them dropped from the US terror list. They say it was promised in the Doha Agreement. Frankly, that was another American train wreck. Washington put the Taliban on the negotiation table, legitimized them, and basically spilled their entire war strategy. The US agreed to withdraw from Afghanistan by May 1st, 2021. All the Taliban had to do was wait. But there's more in the Doha Agreement. It wasn't just about leaving Afghanistan. It also mentions intra-Afghan peace talks and the future of US sanctions on the Taliban. Here's what the deal says, and I'm quoting, "With the start of the intra-Afghan negotiations, the US will initiate an administrative review of current US sanctions and rewards list against members of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan with the goal of removing these sanctions by August 27, 2020. 2020. Those dates are not relevant anymore, but the letter of the agreement is. Did the US promise to lift sanctions on the Taliban? They did. It clearly says so in the agreement. But was it an unconditional promise? Doesn't seem like it. The delisting process was to begin after the intra-Afghan talks. Well, those talks were abandoned by the Taliban. They overthrew the civilian government. So is the Doha Agreement still alive? Both sides have violated its terms. Joe Biden changed the deadline for troop withdrawal. The Taliban gave up on talks. The deal was the beginning of the end for Afghanistan. The US gave up way too much and got very little in return. For starters, they gave the Taliban a deadline, May 1st, and we're out. For a group that waited 20 years in the wilderness, this was gold. Just one more year and Afghanistan would be theirs. The US also promised to release Taliban prisoners. Just to be clear, these were prisoners of the Afghan government, not the American government, yet they promised to release them. Same with the intra-Afghan talks. America demanded reconciliation, but the Afghan government was not even part of the Doha agreement. These are big concessions. What did the US get in return? Security for its own troops, not the Afghan soldiers or civilians, but Americans. Just America's own soldiers. There was nothing on human rights, nothing on freedom for women, and most importantly, no enforcement mechanism. The Doha agreement was pinned on hope. Hope that the Taliban will keep their word. Big surprise, they did not. So what does America do? Make more concessions. The Pentagon says military cooperation with the Taliban is possible. The State Department says recognition must be earned.
And the trajectory of its relationship with us and with the rest of the world will depend on its actions. Now, the Taliban has made a series of commitments publicly and privately, including with regard to freedom of travel, with regard to combating terrorism and not allowing Afghanistan to be used as a launching point for terrorism directed at us or at anyone else, including as well upholding the basic rights of the Afghan people, to include women and girls and minorities, to have some inclusivity in government, to avoid reprisals.
What actions is the US waiting for? The Taliban have banned protests, they're beating up journalists, they have banned women's sports. What more does the US want? Joe Biden keeps saying that human rights are at the center of his foreign policy. He also says human rights cannot be upheld at gunpoint, so I guess his only option is talks. Right now, the US has a narrow focus in Afghanistan. Evacuation and terrorism, human rights, freedoms, gender equality can wait, apparently. And this narrow vision works perfectly in the Taliban's favor. And we've received some breaking inputs now. Sirajuddin Haqqani has taken charge as the Taliban's home minister. The sanctioned terrorist, Sirajuddin Haqqani. Most importantly, we have a picture of him now. Let's show you how this man looks like. The man on your screen, Sirajuddin Haqqani, the dreaded terrorist / interior minister of Afghanistan now. Until now, we only had criminal sketches of this man, plus one obscure picture from an FBI most wanted poster. This is Haqqani in Kabul, taking charge as the acting interior minister of the Taliban government. They're calling it an introductory meeting for him. Just to recap, Sirajuddin Haqqani is a United Nations designated terrorist. He carries a bounty of $5 million. Finally, we can put a face to this dreaded name. When the Taliban first came to power in the 1990s, only one Afghan leader managed to defend his province against the terror group's onslaught. His name was Ahmad Shah Massoud. Afghans called him the Lion of Panjshir. He was a national hero. The Al-Qaeda assassinated Massoud on the 9th of September 2001, 2 days before 9/11. Our next report tells you why the Al-Qaeda felt threatened by Massoud.
Your leader is dead. This is how the Taliban announced the assassination of Ahmad Shah Massoud, the Lion of Panjshir, in September 2001. For the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda, their biggest challenger was gone. But Massoud's legacy continues in Afghanistan. He is the country's national hero. Born in the scenic Panjshir Valley in Afghanistan, Massoud fought for his country throughout his life. Massoud's first brush with revolutionary activities was during his student days when he joined a movement to oppose the Soviet-backed communist government in Afghanistan. He was only 20 years old. Massoud emerged as the leading anti-Soviet guerrilla leader in the 1980s. The war against the Soviets was over in 1989. But Massoud had a new challenge, and he was not the one to back down. In the 1990s, the Lion of Panjshir waged war against the Taliban, who had by then seized power in Afghanistan. The odds were against Massoud. His Northern Alliance controlled less than 5% of the Afghan territory. In spite of this, Massoud prevented Panjshir from falling into the hands of the Taliban. He toured the world from Europe to the United States to mobilize support for the resistance and humanitarian aid for Afghans. He also had a warning for the West. In his speech to the European Parliament, Massoud mentioned an impending attack. The world did not heed him, but his enemies did. Massoud was assassinated by the Al-Qaeda just 2 days before 9/11. It was a suicide blast by two terrorists posing as journalists in Afghanistan's Takhar province. The hit was ordered by 9/11 mastermind Osama bin Laden himself.
Thanks to our military and our allies and the brave fighters of Afghanistan, the Taliban regime is coming to an end.
The days following 9/11 saw the defeat of the Taliban after the US invaded Afghanistan. Massoud's Northern Alliance played a major role in the fighting. His legacy was taken forward by his son Ahmad Massoud.
If he was alive, none of these events that happened, it would happen. If he was alive, the 9/11 wouldn't happen. American wouldn't intervene in Afghanistan, and our struggle with Taliban would come to either a peaceful end, or it would come to a victory of Afghans and victory of the resistance, and we would be on our way to rebuilding and reconstructing our country with our own doctrine, with our Afghan agenda.
20 years after his assassination, Massoud remains a formidable figure in Afghanistan. His mausoleum in Panjshir is no less than a sacred site. For a country marred by war, Massoud is a symbol of hope and resilience. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
20 years after Ahmad Shah Massoud's death, Afghanistan's future looks grim. Can it survive the Taliban and the many terror groups that the Taliban is hand in gloves with? The biggest threat to Afghanistan's future, and by extension to the future of this region, is terrorism. Today, India raised this at the Brics summit. Brics is the acronym, as the acronym suggests, has 5 members: Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. BRICS. India holds the presidency of the group for this year. The summit was held virtually. India hosted it. The focus was on terrorism in the wake of the fall of Kabul. Ahead of the summit, BRICS members adopted what they call the Counter-Terrorism Action Plan. Let me tell you what this is. The plan aims to strengthen existing mechanisms to combat terrorism and its financing. It aims to prevent misuse of the internet by terrorists, to curb their travel, enhance border controls, protect soft targets, share information and build capacities against terror threats. Under India's presidency, the BRICS has dramatically expanded its range of cooperation on the anti-terrorism front. Last month, BRICS members discussed ways to deal with illegal drug production and trafficking. And this is very important. The Taliban, remember, depended heavily on the drug trade to survive. Going by one estimate, the Taliban earned at least $40 million annually from levies on opium production, heroin labs and drug shipments. The BRICS nations now have an action plan in place to fight threats of this nature. But can they work together to deliver realistic gains? India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was chairing the summit today, outlined the priorities for this alliance.
BRICS at 15, intra-BRICS cooperation for continuity, consolidation and consensus. ये 4 C एक प्रकार से हमारी ब्रिक्स भागीदारी के मूल सिद्धांत है।
The ideas are there, the plans are in place, but execution is going to be a challenge because of the divergence of interests. As an alliance, Brics is yet to get its act together. The members do not have a lot in common. And that was evident in the opening remarks of the leaders. After Prime Minister Modi, China's President Xi Jinping spoke, there was no mention of Afghanistan. Instead, the Chinese president was looking for synergy in development policies.
Our 5 countries have sought synergy between our development policies and drawn on our complementarities. We have made solid progress in various areas of cooperation in the spirit of pragmatism, innovation, and win-win cooperation, and we have forged ahead on our common journey of development.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa wanted Brics to push for reforms at the United Nations.
We call on Brics to be equally bold and determined in seeking reform of the United Nations Security Council, among other things, to enable Africa to take its rightful place among the collective nations of the world in this crucial body.
Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro applauded his country's partnerships with other members.
I would like to thank the Indian rotating presidency for the excellent efforts undertaken in 2021 and for organizing this summit meeting. It is a pity that we are not able to jointly experience the warm welcome of Prime Minister Modi, which I was able to enjoy firsthand when I visited India in January 2020, a visit which to date positively reverberates in our bilateral relations.
Only one leader publicly spoke about the situation in Afghanistan. Russian President Vladimir Putin. He blamed the United States for creating this crisis, and he said the situation presents a threat to all the neighbors of Afghanistan.
US and its allies' withdrawal from Afghanistan has led to a new crisis. We are all interested in Afghanistan's ceasing to be a threat to the neighbors, so that the Afghan territory would be a source of drug trafficking and terrorism. We are interested in stopping migration flows. We are for Afghans living in peace and dignity on their soil.
Putin hit the nail on its head. Those sentiments were echoed in the joint declaration. It said that leaders are concerned about the developments in Afghanistan, and I'm quoting, Afghan territory should not become a terror sanctuary. The question is, what are these leaders prepared to do to ensure this? Today's Brics meet could be the start of something bigger, a possible alliance against the Taliban. And taking the lead are India and Russia. Moscow has dispatched its top security official to New Delhi, National Security Advisor Nikolay Patrushev. He had a flurry of meetings, first with India's NSA Ajit Doval and then with Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar. This is a big development for India. Until now, New Delhi has been focused on evacuations. The security implications could wait. Now, this visit by the Russian NSA changes all of that. It was the first extensive review of the Afghan situation. All key departments were involved, including the External Affairs Ministry, the Defense Ministry, and intelligence agencies. The discussions went well, we are told. Russia and India are on the same page on almost all major issues. Number one, the Taliban must adhere to its promises of inclusivity. Number two, containing the terror threat from Afghanistan. And number three, curbing arms smuggling from across Afghan borders. The fourth point, tackling the drug menace, stopping Afghanistan from becoming a hub of opium. All these issues relate to regional stability. Both India and Russia remember enough of the first Taliban regime. In Central Asia, there was instability. In South Asia, there were terror havens. Preventing a repeat is top priority. Russia's big worry is Central Asia, a region with around half a dozen Islamic republics. These countries practice a different kind of Islam, not the hardcore version of the Taliban. You could call it a Soviet hangover. Russia fears the Taliban will try to export its radical vision to Central Asia, and they're not alone. Both Pakistan and Turkey are also looking to make inroads. So Russia has allied with India. Both countries will work together to insulate Central Asia from radicalization. How will that work? Russia is holding military drills in Central Asia. The idea is to beef up border security to prevent violence from spilling over. Where does India feature in this operation? Reports say New Delhi and Moscow will step up bilateral security coordination. We are talking about intelligence sharing, mutual consultation, exchange of information. India will also step up its relations with Central Asian republics. This could become a strong alliance of countries surrounding Afghanistan. But the terror threat is not just the north. The big problem is Pakistan's continued support for the Taliban. India raised this issue with the Russian delegation. It also highlighted Pakistan's links with Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Toiba. India and Russia face the same challenges. Only the theatres are different. One is Central Asia, the other is South Asia. Russia does have considerable leverage over the Taliban. The question is, how will it use that leverage? When Kabul fell, Moscow was upbeat. The Americans were finally out. But in the last few days, that excitement has fizzled out. Moscow realizes that the Taliban has not really changed. They will expand their radical agenda, maybe not today, but once they are settled in power. This strategic convergence is good news then. India and Russia have clearly defined goals in Afghanistan: peace, stability and order. And to achieve this, they're planning to coordinate their approach at multilateral forums like the United Nations Security Council, for instance. Russia is a permanent member and India will be on the council for 2 years. They can coordinate on important decisions like sanctioning Taliban leaders, trade embargoes, other punitive actions. This is not the first time that India and Russia are working together on Afghanistan. They did it from 1996 to 2001. They couldn't topple the Taliban, but they kept the Northern Alliance alive and strong. Strong enough to recapture Kabul after 9/11. Let's turn to Canada. The country is heading to polls in less than 2 weeks. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called for the snap election in the middle of a pandemic. He was hoping to win some additional seats in Parliament and turn his minority government into a majority government. How is the campaign going so far? Experts are predicting a boomerang. They say Trudeau's Liberal Party may end up losing the election. What's more, Trudeau may find himself out of office in 2 weeks. Here's a report.
Canada will go to polls on the 20th of September. On the tickets will be Justin Trudeau, the incumbent Prime Minister. He is hoping to keep his seat. It was Trudeau's idea to call for a snap election, that too 2 years before the end of his term and in the middle of a pandemic. Are you wondering why? Trudeau is hoping to win a majority. He currently leads a minority government. He has been in power for 6 years. He has won 2 elections. In 2015, Trudeau won a majority, but in 2019, he fell short. The Canadian Prime Minister is now hoping to turn that around. He is betting on the country's vaccination campaign. FYI, Canada happens to have one of the highest proportions of vaccinated people, but can jabs convert into votes? Trudeau may have made a wrong estimation. The Prime Minister's strongest competitor is Erin O'Toole. He is running on the Conservative ticket. O'Toole is a corporate lawyer. He has also served in the Air Force, and he is 48. Here are the other prime ministerial hopefuls. Bloc Québécois Yves-François Blanchet, Jagmeet Singh from the New Democrats, and the Green Party's Anami Paul. The candidates went face-to-face in a recent debate. Here is what happened.
J'ai démontré que oui, on peut fonctionner pour faire de grandes choses pendant une pandémie, mais nous avons besoin d'un mandat.
Être en coalition si jamais il y avait un gouvernement constant.
Ce n'est pas le temps pour une élection en plein d'une pandémie.
Mandat de 4 ans qui aide les gens.
Ça fait sourire beaucoup.
Le Parlement a marché pendant 2 ans. Il aurait pu marcher pendant 4 ans.
Est-ce que vous allez les consulter si vous êtes minoritaire?
Au Parlement, il y a quelques mois, on avait une vote. Si on doit avoir une élection dans une pandémie, oui ou non.
A couple of days ago, when Trudeau was campaigning, someone threw gravel at him. Here's how Trudeau responded.
Let me be very clear and state the obvious, first and foremost. It is absolutely unacceptable that people be throwing things and endangering others at a political rally.
The truth is, Canada is not too happy with the snap polls. People do not see the point in rushing to vote in the middle of a fourth wave. Making matters worse is Trudeau's track record. Voters say Trudeau has not done much on climate or to integrate Indigenous people. The discovery of mass graves has not helped the Liberal government's image. Polls indicate come September 20th, the Liberals could lose to the Conservatives. On a better day, it would be a tie. If Trudeau manages to turn the tide around and win a majority seat, then he would beat his father Pierre Trudeau's 15-year term in office. Justin Trudeau is calling this election a pivotal moment for Canada. Voters could not agree more. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
North Korea is marking the 73rd foundation anniversary. A nighttime military parade was held in Pyongyang, attended by the nation's supreme leader Kim Jong-un. So how is this parade different? Well, North Korea did not showcase its ballistic missiles for a change. Military troops were paraded wearing orange hazmat suits, which apparently highlights the country's pandemic response. Our next report brings you more details.
North Korea celebrated its 73rd foundation anniversary with a nighttime military parade. The parade was held at the Kim Il-sung Square in the capital city of Pyongyang. Local media has published pictures showing military personnel marching in orange hazmat suits with medical-grade masks. This is apparently a symbol of North Korea's pandemic response. The country usually displays ballistic missiles. However, this time, tractors and fire engines were on display. Troops were seen holding rifles and multiple rocket launchers to showcase the nation's military strength. North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un was present at the parade. However, he did not deliver any speech. Unlike last October, when the country held a pre-dawn military parade showcasing previously unseen intercontinental ballistic missiles, this time conventional weapons were on display, including multiple rocket launchers and tractors carrying anti-tank missiles. It was also the first time since 2013 that North Korea staged a parade with the 5.7 million strong Waka peasant Red Guards. It was launched as reserve forces after the exit of Chinese forces. Experts see the absence of strategic weapons and the focus on public security forces as Kim's greater focus on domestic issues such as COVID-19 and the economy. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.